Today is the 24th of August. We've just come to the 46th chapter of the Samyutta Nikaya, Bojjhanga Samyutta. It's one of the important chapters. Bojjhanga means the factors of enlightenment. The word bodhi and anga. The first sutta is 46.1 at Savatthi. The Buddha said, "Monks, based upon the Himalayas, the king of mountains, the Nagas nurture their bodies and acquire strength. When they have nurtured their bodies and acquired strength, they then enter the pools. From the pools they enter the lakes, then the streams, then the rivers, and finally they enter the ocean. There they achieve greatness and expansiveness of body. So too monks, based upon virtue, established upon virtue, a monk develops and cultivates the 7 factors of enlightenment, and thereby he achieves greatness and expansiveness in wholesome states." Stop here for a moment. These Nagas, serpent spirits, I think it's mentioned in some other suttas, that when the mother Naga wants to give birth, will go up these big rivers, and then go up, and these big rivers that come down from the Himalayan mountains, then they go up to the Himalayan mountains and they give birth there. So these baby Nagas, as they grow up, and then they slowly find their way back to the rivers and down to the ocean. So the Buddha says, when they enter the ocean, they achieve greatness and expansiveness of body. So, just like the ocean, the 7 factors of enlightenment will help us to achieve greatness and expansiveness in wholesome states. And how does a monk, based upon virtue, established upon virtue, develop the 7 factors of enlightenment? Here, monks, a monk develops the enlightenment factor of recollection, sati, which is based upon seclusion, dispassion and cessation, maturing in release. He develops the enlightenment factor of investigation of Dhamma, the factor of energy, the factor of delight, here says rapture, the factor of tranquility, the factor of concentration, the factor of equanimity, which is based upon seclusion, dispassion and cessation, maturing in release. It is in this way, monks, that a monk, based upon virtue, established upon virtue, develops the 7 factors of enlightenment, and thereby achieves greatness and expansiveness in wholesome states. So virtue is a starting point. Virtue is moral conduct, keeping the precepts. If we keep the precepts, we don't harm others. That is virtue. And based upon virtue, we cultivate the 7 Bojjangas. The second sutta actually is a very important sutta. I had originally intended to read the sutta, but then as I went along, I found that it is repeated in 46.51, and then 46.51 there is it's more detailed. There are some other things not mentioned in this sutta. So I will skip this 46.2 and later we'll read the 46.51. The next sutta is 46.3. This sutta is quite important because it tells you how to practice, how to develop the 7 Bojjhanga, how to practice the 7 Bojjhanga. The Buddha said, monks, those monks who are accomplished in virtue, accomplished in concentration. I stop it there. I just mentioned a while, because in the introduction I forgot to mention these Bojjhangas are factors of enlightenment. That means if you practice these 7 factors, they will bring you to enlightenment. They are very important factors to achieve enlightenment. Monks, those monks who are accomplished in virtue, accomplished in concentration, accomplished in wisdom, accomplished in liberation, accomplished in the knowledge and vision of liberation. Even the sight of those monks is helpful, I say. Even listening to them, even approaching them, even attending on them, even recollecting them, even going forth after them is helpful, I say. For what reason? Because when one has heard the Dhamma from such monks, one dwells withdrawn by way of two kinds of withdrawal. Withdrawal of body and withdrawal of mind. Stop here for a moment. Here the Buddha says it's very helpful, very beneficial to come into contact with arahants. And because why? Because when you come into contact with arahants, then you are able to learn the Dhamma from them. And then when you have learned the Dhamma from them, you will dwell withdrawn, withdrawal of body and withdrawal of mind. The Pali word here for the withdrawal is upa kasena. Possibly it is similar to the word viveka, seclusion of body and seclusion of mind. Because if you don't withdraw from the world, you will have a lot of suffering. The world is a world of suffering. As Chinese say, ku hai. To get away from suffering, we have to withdraw from the world. So there are two ways of withdrawing. One is by body and the other one is by mind. Dwelling thus withdrawn, one recollects that Dhamma and thinks it over. Whenever a monk dwelling thus withdrawn recollects that Dhamma and thinks it over, on that occasion the enlightenment factor of sati, recollection, is aroused by the monk. On that occasion the monk develops the enlightenment factor of sati. On that occasion the enlightenment factor of sati comes to fulfillment by development in the monk. Stop here for a moment. You see here the explanation of sati. You have to be very careful because nowadays people simply give a wrong interpretation of sati. Sati is not general mindfulness. Nowadays people like to translate sati as general mindfulness. Here, sati is recollection, recalling the Dhamma that you have heard. So, sati generally refers to recalling four things, bringing to mind, recollecting four things. Body, feeling, body, feeling, mind, and the Dhamma. Dhamma refers to the Buddha's teachings, not the states of mind. Out of these four, actually recollecting the Dhamma is the most important, as I mentioned before. If you want to become enlightened, there are 5 occasions of enlightenment. And 4 of them have directly to do with Dhamma. Without Dhamma knowledge, you cannot become enlightened. So here, you see, the meaning of sati here is very different from what people interpret nowadays. So the Buddha says it is very important to come into contact with somebody enlightened like the Buddha. Because when actually we are in contact with the Buddha, even though the Buddha's physical body is no more with us, the Buddha is still around. The Dhamma he has left for us is the Buddha. The Buddha says when you see the Dhamma, you see the Buddha. When you see the Buddha, you see the Dhamma. The Dhamma represents the Buddha. You don't need his physical body, you need his teachings. So now, because we have come into contact with the Buddha, we have heard his Dhamma. So after hearing his Dhamma, we must recollect, recall that Dhamma that we have heard from the Buddha. And when you recall that Dhamma, you recollect that Dhamma, that is sati. Not mindfulness of how you walk, how you sit, that is totally nothing to the general mindfulness has nothing to do with the sati, the Buddha sati. Especially here, when it concerns the Bojjhanga, as a factor of enlightenment, you have to recollect the Dhamma. So, in this Bojjhanga, this factor of enlightenment, sati is recollecting the Dhamma more than anything else. So when you recollect the Dhamma, then the Buddha says, you develop the enlightenment factor of sati. And on that occasion, the enlightenment factor of sati comes to fulfillment by development in the monk. So remember, sati is recollecting the Dhamma mainly if you want to become enlightened. Dwelling thus mindfully, he investigates that Dhamma with wisdom, examines it, makes an investigation of it. Whenever a monk dwelling thus mindfully investigates that Dhamma with wisdom, examines it, makes an investigation of it, on that occasion the enlightenment factor of investigation of Dhamma is aroused by the monk. On that occasion, the monk develops the enlightenment factor of investigation of Dhamma. On that occasion, the enlightenment factor of investigation of Dhamma comes to fulfillment by development in the monk. Stop here for a moment. So you see carefully how the Bojangas develop. It's not in any order, Firstly, you must learn the Dhamma first. That's why in some other suttas, especially I think in the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha mentioned before he wanted to teach a monk how to meditate using the Satipatthana, the Buddha said you must first establish two foundations. One is sila, moral conduct. The second one is right view. And right view comes from listening to the Dhamma. That's why I see here, when you come into contact with Arahant, the first thing, the most important thing is to learn the Dhamma from him. After you learn the Dhamma, then you recollect the Dhamma, that is sati. So sati is the first factor to practice, out of these 7 Bojjhangas. The first one you need to practice is sati, recollecting the Dhamma first. After recollecting the Dhamma, then you investigate the Dhamma, you reflect on the Dhamma. That is the second factor called investigation of Dhamma, Dhamma Vichaya. While he investigates that Dhamma with wisdom, examines it, makes an investigation of it, his energy is aroused without slackening. Whenever a monk's energy is aroused without slackening, as he investigates that Dhamma with wisdom, examines it, on that occasion the enlightenment factor of energy is aroused by the monk. On that occasion the monk develops the enlightenment factor of energy. On that occasion, the enlightenment factor of energy comes to fulfillment by development in the monk. So the third factor to develop is energy. Because after you have heard the Dhamma and you recollect it and you investigate it, then you understand how to practice the Dhamma. So having understood how to practice the Dhamma, you put the practice into motion, that is energy. Using energetic effort to practice the Dhamma. So there is energy. Practicing the Dhamma means you recall the Dhamma, you sit in meditation, you keep your precepts, etc. Sila, Samadhi, Panya. So that's the third factor to practice. When his energy is aroused, there arises in him spiritual delight. Whenever spiritual delight arises in a monk whose energy is aroused, on that occasion the enlightenment factor of delight is aroused by the monk. On that occasion the monk develops the enlightenment factor of delight, piti. On that occasion the enlightenment factor of delight, piti, comes to fulfillment by development in the monk. So here the fourth factor to develop after energy is delight. When you put energy in meditation, this delight, piti, arises. Now what is spiritual delight? You turn to page 1284. 1284. We went through that sutta in case you have forgotten. Okay. Actually, the bottom of 1283. And what monks is carnal delight? Then the Buddha said, monks, there are these 5 causes of sensual pleasure. The delight that arises in dependence on these 5 causes of sensual pleasure, this is called carnal delight. And what monks is spiritual delight? Spiritual delight is secluded from sensual pleasures and from unwholesome states. A monk enters and dwells in the first jhana, which is accompanied by thought directed and sustained, with delight and happiness born of seclusion. With the subsiding of thought directed and sustained, he enters and dwells in the second jhana, which has internal confidence and unification of mind, is without thought directed and sustained, and has delight and happiness born of concentration. This is called spiritual delight. So spiritual delight, the Pali word is iti niramisa. Iti niramisa. So spiritual delight refers to the delight that arises in the first and the second jhana, right? It's very clear here from this Sutta 36.31. So now we go back to this page 1571. So the Buddha says, when this monk puts forth energetic effort, that means meditates, then spiritual delight arises. So just now we just saw that this piti niramisa refers to the delight that arises in the first and the second jhana. So in other words, this monk, after learning the Dhamma, then he puts forth energy, he meditates, and then he attains the first and the second jhana, then only he has that spiritual delight. So he develops that spiritual delight by attaining the first and the second jhana. For one whose mind is uplifted by delight, the body becomes tranquil and the mind becomes tranquil. Whenever monks, the body becomes tranquil and the mind becomes tranquil. In a monk whose mind is uplifted by delight, on that occasion the enlightenment factor of tranquility is aroused by the monk. On that occasion the monk develops the enlightenment factor of tranquility. On that occasion the enlightenment factor of tranquility comes to fulfillment by development in the monk. Here this tranquility can refer to the first jhana, can refer to the second jhana, can refer to the third jhana also. This tranquility is the tranquility of mind as a result of having that piti. After that piti arises, then here the Buddha says tranquility is developed. For one whose body is tranquil and who is happy, the mind becomes concentrated. Whenever monks, the mind becomes concentrated in a monk whose body is tranquil, and who is happy, on that occasion the enlightenment factor of concentration is aroused by the monk. On that occasion the monk develops the enlightenment factor of concentration. On that occasion the enlightenment factor of concentration comes to fulfillment by development in the monk. Stop here for a moment. Now in the suttas, the Buddha, whenever he refers to samadhi, concentration, he says samadhi refers to four things. First jhana, second jhana, third jhana, fourth jhana. So here, when the Buddha says concentration, it refers to any one of these four jhanas. A perfect concentration is the fourth jhana. So here refers to the four jhanas. And then the Buddha continues. He closely looks on with equanimity at the mind thus concentrated. Whenever monks, a monk closely looks on with equanimity at the mind thus concentrated. On that occasion, the enlightenment factor of equanimity is aroused by the monk. On that occasion, the monk develops the enlightenment factor of equanimity. On that occasion, the enlightenment factor of equanimity comes to fulfillment by development in the monk. Now, what is this equanimity? We go back to page 1284. That's why it's very important to study many suttas, so you cross-reference the suttas and you can understand better. Page 1285. Here it says there are three types of equanimity, actually two types. Carnal equanimity and spiritual equanimity. Carnal equanimity refers to the equanimity that arises in dependence on the five chords of sensual pleasure. And then spiritual equanimity refers to the fourth jhana. This is very important. So here we are talking, just now we talked about spiritual delight, spiritual piti. So now we must be referring to spiritual equanimity, upekkha. So spiritual equanimity in this sutta 36.31, it means the fourth jhana. Okay. So just now we went through the first jhana and second jhana when that piti arises. And after that we talk about tranquility, concentration. So it's natural that we end up with the fourth jhana. So this last factor of the Bojangas refers to the fourth jhana. So you see these 7 factors, these 7 Bojangas, how they are cultivated, from the learning, hearing the Dhamma. You practice, and slowly you go through the first jhana, second jhana, third jhana, fourth jhana. Then only, after you have attained the fourth jhana, then all these factors are complete. Monks, and these 7 factors of enlightenment have been developed and cultivated in this way. 7 fruits and benefits may be expected. What are the 7 fruits and benefits? One attains final knowledge early in this very life. If one does not attain final knowledge early in this very life, then one attains final knowledge at the time of death. If one does not attain final knowledge early in this very life, or at the time of death, then with the utter destruction of the 5 lower factors, one becomes an attainer of Nibbana in the interval. If one does not attain final knowledge early in this life, or when one dies, or in the interval, then with the utter destruction of the 5 lower factors, one becomes an attainer of Nibbana upon landing. Then if one does not attain final Nibbana early in this life, or at the time of death, or in the interval, or upon landing, then with the utter destruction of 5 lower factors, one becomes an attainer of Nibbana without exertion. Then after that, with exertion, then after that, one becomes one bound upstream, heading towards the Akanita realm. So these are the 7 factors, the 7 fruits and benefits to be expected. The last few benefits are mentioned, bound for the Akanita realm, and then with exertion, without exertion, upon landing, and in the interval. These 5 descriptions refer to the Anagamin. The Anagamin person, after he passes away, he can attain Nibbana in these 5 ways. This one we won't talk about it tonight, we'll come across it some other day. So this is a very important sutta. It explains very clearly how to develop the 7 Bojjangas. This is one of those very important suttas. A lot of monks, they don't refer to. In fact, if you want to learn meditation, you want to learn the practice of the holy life, this is the type of sutta you want to understand, how to practice the Bojjangas in the right way, systematically, one by one. Even like the Noble Eightfold Path also is to be practiced systematically from the first factor, right view onwards. A lot of people don't understand, they come to the Dhamma, they start practicing the last factor, meditation. So exactly with the Bojangas, you start by learning the Dhamma, then you recollect the Dhamma. Then after recollecting the Dhamma, then you investigate the Dhamma. And after investigating and understanding the Dhamma, then you put it into practice. When you put it into practice, you use energetic effort. So when you use energetic effort, then you attain the first and the second jhana. Then this piti arises. So after attaining the first and second jhana, the mind becomes tranquil. And after that, the mind becomes concentrated. Then after that, you attain either that when you see the mind is concentrated, it may be that that person has already attained the 4th jhana or has already attained the 3 jhanas. But the last factor is definitely the 4th jhana, and the mind becomes equanimous. So all these 7 Bojjangas all refer to learning the Dhamma and practicing samatha meditation. Because learning the Dhamma is actually vipassana. When you recall the Dhamma, when you investigate the Dhamma, all that is vipassana, contemplation. 46.5, Exavati. Then a certain monk approached the Blessed One and said, Venerable Sir, it is said, factors of enlightenment, factors of enlightenment. In what sense are they called factors of enlightenment? Or why are they called factors of enlightenment? They lead to enlightenment, monk. Therefore, they are called factors of enlightenment. Here, monk, one develops the enlightenment factor of mindfulness, which is based upon seclusion. enlightenment factor of recollection, which is based upon seclusion, dispassion and cessation, maturing in release. One develops the enlightenment factor one by one. It has to go in that order. The last one is equanimity. While one is developing these 7 factors of enlightenment, one's mind is liberated from the asava of sensuality, from the asava of existence, from the asava of ignorance. When it is liberated, there comes the knowledge it's liberated. One understands, destroyed is birth, the holy life has been lived, what had to be done has been done, there is no more for this state of being. They lead to enlightenment, monk, therefore they are called factors of enlightenment. These factors of enlightenment are very important. If a person wants to attain enlightenment, without developing these 7 factors, they cannot attain enlightenment. That's why. So here the Buddha explains, they lead to enlightenment, therefore they are called factors of enlightenment. The next sutta we come to also very important, 46.6. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Saketa in the deer path at the Anjana grove. Then the wanderer Kundalya approached the Blessed One and exchanged greetings with him. When they had concluded their greetings and cordial talk, he sat down to one side and said to the Blessed One, Master Gotama, I am one who stays around monastic parks and frequents assemblies. After the meal, when I have finished my breakfast, it is my custom to roam and wander from park to park, from garden to garden. There I see some ascetics and Brahmins engaged in discussion for the benefits of rescuing their own theses in debate and condemning the theses of others. But what is the benefit that Master Gotama lives for? And the Buddha said, Kundalya, the Tathagata lives for the benefit and fruit of true knowledge and liberation. In other words, for liberation or enlightenment. But Master Gotama, what things, when developed and cultivated, fulfill true knowledge and liberation? And the Buddha said, the 7 factors of enlightenment, Kundalya, when developed and cultivated, fulfill true knowledge and liberation. But Master Gotama, what things, when developed and cultivated, fulfill the 7 factors of enlightenment? The 4 intense states of recollection, Satipatthana, Kundalya, when developed and cultivated, fulfill the 7 factors of enlightenment. But Master Gotama, what things, when developed and cultivated, fulfill the 4 intense states of recollection? The 3 kinds of good conduct, Kundalya, when developed and cultivated, fulfill the 4 intense states of recollection. But Master Gotama, what things, when developed and cultivated, fulfill the 3 kinds of good conduct? Restraint of the sense faculties, Kundalya, when developed and cultivated, fulfills the 3 kinds of good conduct. And how Kundalya is restraint of the sense faculties developed and cultivated, so that it fulfills the 3 kinds of good conduct. Here Kundalya, having seen an agreeable form with the eye, a monk does not long for it, or become excited by it, or generate lust for it. His body is steady, and his mind is steady, inwardly well composed and well liberated. But having seen a disagreeable form with the eye, he is not dismayed by it, not daunted, not rejected, without ill will. His body is steady and his mind is steady, inwardly well composed and well liberated. Further, Kundalya, having heard an agreeable sound with the ear, having smelled an agreeable odor with the nose, having severed an agreeable taste with the tongue, tactile object with the body, thought with the mind, a monk does not long for it, or become excited by it, or generate lust for it. But having cognized a disagreeable thought with the mind, he is not dismayed by it, not daunted, not dejected, without ill will. His body is steady and his mind is steady, inwardly well composed and liberated. When Kundalya, after he has seen a form with the eye, a monk's body is steady and his mind is steady, inwardly well composed and well liberated, in regard to both agreeable and disagreeable forms. When after he has heard a sound with the ear, smelled an odor, savored a taste, felt a tactile object, cognized a thought, a monk's body is steady and his mind is steady, inwardly well composed and well liberated, in regard to both agreeable and disagreeable mental phenomena. then his restraint of the sense faculties has been developed and cultivated in such a way that it fulfills the three kinds of good conduct. Stop here for a moment. So here the Buddha says a monk has to develop his mind so well that when the six sense objects impinge at the six sense faculties, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, he's not moved by them, whether it's sights or sounds or smells or tastes, etc. He's not moved by them. And if that is the case, his sense faculties are restrained, then it also means that the three kinds of good conduct are restrained. These three kinds of good conduct refers to the body conduct, speech and thoughts. And how, Kundalya, are the three kinds of good conduct developed and cultivated so that they fulfill the four intense states of recollection? Here, Kundalya, having abandoned bodily misconduct, a monk develops good bodily conduct. Having abandoned verbal misconduct, he develops a good verbal conduct. Having abandoned mental misconduct, he develops good mental conduct. It is in this way that the three kinds of good conduct are developed and cultivated, so that they fulfill the four intense states of recollection. And how, Kundalya, are the four intense states of recollection developed and cultivated, so that they fulfill the 7 factors of enlightenment? Here, Kundalya, a monk dwells contemplating the body in the body, ardent, clearly comprehending, and mindful, having removed covetousness and grief in regard to the world. Similarly, he dwells contemplating feelings, mind, Dhamma. Here they translate as phenomena. It's not phenomena, it's Dhamma. Buddha's teachings. Ardent, clearly comprehending and mindful, having removed covetousness and grief in regard to the world. It is in this way that the 4 Satipatthanas are developed and cultivated so that they fulfill the 7 factors of enlightenment. And how, Kundalya, are the 7 factors of enlightenment developed and cultivated so that they fulfill true knowledge and liberation? Here, Kundalya, a monk develops the enlightenment factor of of recollection, which is based upon seclusion, dispassion and cessation, maturing in release. He develops the factor of investigation of Dhamma, etc., down to equanimity. It is in this way that the 7 factors of enlightenment are developed and cultivated, so that they fulfill true knowledge and liberation. And this was said, the wanderer Kundalya said to the Blessed One, Magnificent Master Gotama, Magnificent Master Gotama. The Dhamma has been made clear in many ways by Master Gotama, as though he were turning upright what had been turned upside down, revealing what was hidden, showing the way to one who was lost, or holding up a lamp in the dark for those with eyesight to see forms. I go for refuge to Master Gotama, and to the Dhamma, and to the Bhikkhu Sangha. From today, let Master Gotama remember me as a lay follower who has gone for refuge for life. That's the end of the sutta. So here, the Buddha explains how one thing leads to another. Namely, first we have to restrain our sense faculties. If we restrain our sense faculties, we don't get attracted to pleasant sense objects or feel repelled by unpleasant sense objects. Then in that way we can fulfill the 3 kinds of good conduct, our 3 karmas, through the body, speech and mind. And after that, it means that if you have the 3 good conducts, then you will be able to cultivate and develop the 4 Satipatthanas. And when you develop the 4 Satipatthanas, then the 7 Bojangas also come to fulfillment. And when you develop fully the 7 Bojangas, then you attain liberation and true knowledge. The benefit that Master Gotama lives for is for true knowledge and liberation. For us practicing the holy life, that is also the ultimate benefit, true knowledge and liberation. So even if you don't attain fully this liberation, at least we try as much as we can. But there are some people, they come in and wear the robe, but they don't practice the Dhamma, they don't strive for liberation, then their direction has gone the wrong way. The next sutta is 46.12. The Buddha said, monks, this is the forerunner and precursor of the rising of the sun, that is, the dawn. So too monks, for a monk this is the forerunner and precursor for the arising of the 7 factors of enlightenment, that is, good friendship, kalyana mitta. When a monk has a good friend, it is to be expected that he will develop and cultivate the 7 factors of enlightenment. And how does a monk who has a good friend develop and cultivate the 7 factors of enlightenment? Here, monks, a monk develops the enlightenment factor of mind, of recollection, which is based upon seclusion, dispassion and cessation, maturing in release. He develops the enlightenment factor of investigation of Dhamma, etc. It is in this way, monks, that a monk who has a good friend develops and cultivates the 7 factors of enlightenment. So here, the Buddha says that before the sun can rise, the dawn must come. And so in the same way, the Buddha says that before you can develop the 7 factors of enlightenment, you need a good friend who will help you to develop these 7 factors of enlightenment. So this is a good spiritual friend. So in the Buddha's teachings, a good spiritual friend is very important. The best spiritual friend, of course, as I mentioned, is the Buddha's words. And then if on top of the Buddha's words, you have another spiritual friend who can help you to understand more of the Buddha's words, that will be ideal. 46.14. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Rajagaha in the bamboo grove, the squirrel sanctuary. On that occasion, the Venerable Mahakassapa was dwelling in the Pipali cave, sick, afflicted, gravely ill. Then in the evening, the Blessed One emerged from seclusion and approached the Venerable Mahakassapa. He sat down in the appointed seat and said to the Venerable Mahakassapa, I hope you are bearing up, Kassapa. I hope you are getting better. I hope that your painful feelings are subsiding and not increasing, and that their subsiding, not their increase, is to be discerned. And he said, Venerable Sir, I am not bearing up. I am not getting better. Strong, painful feelings are increasing in me, not subsiding, and their increase, not their subsiding, is to be discerned. And the Buddha said, these 7 factors of enlightenment, Kassapa, have been rightly expounded by me. When developed and cultivated, they lead to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to Nibbana. What's 7? The enlightenment factor of recollection has been rightly expounded by me. When developed and cultivated, it leads to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to Nibbana. The enlightenment factor of investigation of Dhamma has been rightly expounded by me, and similarly for the other factors. These 7 factors of enlightenment, Kassapa, have been rightly expounded by me. When developed and cultivated, they lead to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to Nibbana. And remember, Kassapa said, surely, Blessed One, they are factors of enlightenment. Surely, Fortunate One, they are factors of enlightenment. This is what the Blessed One said. Elated, the Venerable Mahakassapa delighted in the Blessed One's statement, and the Venerable Mahakassapa recovered from that illness. In such a way, the Venerable Mahakassapa was cured of his illness. So here, the Venerable Mahakassapa was very sick. So the Buddha came to him and found that he was very sick. They reminded him of the 7 factors of enlightenment and the 7 Bojjhanga. When he heard about these 7 Bojjhanga, he was so happy. He was so happy that all the sickness went away. The next sutta also similar. 46.16. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Rajagaha in the bamboo grove, the squirrel sanctuary. Now on that occasion, the Blessed One was sick, afflicted, gravely ill. Then the Venerable Mahachunda approached the Blessed One, paid homage to him, and sat down to one side. The Blessed One then said to the Venerable Mahachunda, recite the factors of enlightenment, Chunda. And he said, these 7 factors of enlightenment, Venerable Sir, have been rightly expounded by the Blessed One. When developed and cultivated, they lead to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to Nibbana. What 7? The enlightenment factor of recollection has been rightly expounded by the Blessed One. When cultivated and developed, it leads to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to Nibbana. The enlightenment factor of investigation of Dhamma, etc., etc. These 7 factors of enlightenment, Venerable Sir, have been rightly expounded by the Blessed One. When developed and cultivated, they lead to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to Nibbana. Surely, Chunda, they are factors of enlightenment. Surely, Chunda, they are factors of enlightenment. This is what the Venerable Mahachunda said. The teacher approved, and the Blessed One recovered from that illness. In such a way, the Blessed One was cured of his illness. So in the same way, the Buddha, when he heard about the 7 factors of enlightenment, he was so happy, and he recovered from his sickness. If you all remember, when we do the Bojjhanga chant, is mentioned there, the second paragraph, Ekasaming Samayin, what's the chant? Ekasaming Samayin Nato Mogalanan Chaka Sapangilane Dukite Diswa Bojjange. Then the second one is that Ekada Dhammarajapi Gelanena Bipilito Chunda Terena Tanyeva Banna Petavana Sadarang, etc. So it refers to these 2 suttas. The next sutta is 46.18. The Buddha said, monks, those who have neglected the 7 factors of enlightenment have neglected the noble path leading to the complete destruction of suffering. Those who have undertaken the 7 factors of enlightenment have undertaken the noble path leading to the complete destruction of suffering. What 7? The enlightenment factor of recollection, the enlightenment factor of investigation of Dhamma, etc. Monks, those who have neglected the 7 factors of enlightenment have neglected the noble path leading to the complete destruction of suffering. And those who have undertaken the 7 factors of enlightenment have undertaken the noble path leading to the complete destruction of suffering. So this is just to reiterate the importance of the 7 factors of enlightenment. If you neglect the 7 factors of enlightenment, you are not walking the path to the destruction of suffering. It's only when you undertake the 7 factors of enlightenment, cultivate the 7 Bojangas, that you are walking the path to the complete destruction of suffering. The next sutta is 46.26. The Buddha said, monks, develop the path and the way that leads to the destruction of craving. And what is the path and the way that leads to the destruction of craving? It is the 7 factors of enlightenment. What 7? The enlightenment factor of recollection, the enlightenment factor of investigation of Dhamma, the enlightenment factor of energy, the enlightenment factor of delight, the enlightenment factor of tranquility, the enlightenment factor of concentration, enlightenment factor of equanimity. And this was said, the Venerable Udayi asked the Blessed One, Venerable Sir, how are the 7 factors of enlightenment developed and cultivated so that they lead to the destruction of craving? Buddha said, here Udayi, a monk develops the enlightenment factor of recollection, which is based upon seclusion, dispassion and cessation, maturing in release, which is vast, exalted, measureless, without ill will. When he develops the enlightenment factor of recollection, which is based upon seclusion, etc., craving is abandoned. With the abandoning of craving, karma is abandoned. With the abandoning of karma, suffering is abandoned. Similarly, he develops the enlightenment factor of investigation of Dhamma, energy, piti, tranquility, concentration, equanimity. When he develops these 7 factors, craving is abandoned. With the abandoning of craving, karma is abandoned. With the abandoning of karma, suffering is abandoned. Thus, Udayi, with the destruction of craving comes the destruction of karma. With the destruction of karma comes the destruction of suffering. So when a monk develops the 7 factors of enlightenment, then the craving is abandoned because there's no need to crave for external things. The happiness is within him. So when he has no craving external things, he does not look for anything, so he does not do any karma. And then slowly it will lead him to liberation. Not doing any karma means not doing anything evil, which is necessary, and not even doing any good deeds like charity and all that. 46.29. Monks, I do not see even one other thing that, when developed and cultivated, leads to the abandoning of the things that fetter so effectively as this, the 7 factors of enlightenment. What 7? The enlightenment factor of recollection, the enlightenment factor of investigation of Dhamma, etc. And how, monks, are the 7 factors of enlightenment developed and cultivated so that they lead to the abandoning of the things that fetter? Here, monks, a monk develops the enlightenment factor of recollection, which is based upon seclusion, dispassion, and cessation, maturing in release. He develops the enlightenment factor of investigation of Dhamma, etc., which is based upon seclusion, dispassion, and cessation, maturing in release. It is when the 7 factors of enlightenment are developed and cultivated in this way that they lead to the abandoning of the things that fetter. And what, monks, are the things that fetter? The eye is a thing that fetters. It is here that these fetters, shackles, and clamps arise. The ear is a thing that fetters. The nose, the tongue, the body, the mind is a thing that fetters. It is here that these fetters, shackles, and clamps arise. These are called the things that fetter. It's the end of the sutta. So the 6 sense bases are the things that fetter us to samsara. And when we cultivate the 7 Bojjhangas, it leads to liberation, and then all the 6 sense bases will be abandoned. 46.40. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling among the Sumbas, where there was a town of the Sumbas named Siddhaka. Then the Venerable Udayi approached the Blessed One and said, "It is wonderful, Venerable Sir, it is amazing, Venerable Sir, how helpful has been my devotion and reverence for the Blessed One, my sense of shame and fear of wrongdoing. For in the past, Venerable Sir, when I was still a householder, I did not have much concern for the Dhamma or the Sangha. But when I considered my devotion and reverence for the Blessed One, and my sense of shame and fear of wrongdoing, I went forth from the household life into homelessness. The Blessed One taught me the Dhamma thus: such is form, such is origin, such is passing away. Such is feeling, such is perception, volition, consciousness, such their origin, such their passing away. Then, Venerable Sir, while I was staying in an empty hut, following along with the surge and decline of the 5 aggregates of attachment, I directly knew as it really is, this is suffering. I directly knew as it really is, this is the origin of suffering. I directly knew as it really is, this is the cessation of suffering. I directly knew as it really is, this is the way leading to the cessation of suffering. I have made the breakthrough to the Dhamma, Venerable Sir, and have obtained the path which, when I have developed and cultivated, will lead me on while I am dwelling in the appropriate way to such a state that I shall understand, destroyed is birth, the holy life has been lived, what had to be done has been done, there is no more for this state of being. I have obtained the enlightenment factor of recollection, which, when I have developed and cultivated, will lead me on while I am dwelling in the appropriate way to such a state that I shall understand, destroyed is birth. I have developed the enlightenment factor of investigation of Dhamma, etc., which, when developed and cultivated, will lead me on while I am dwelling in the appropriate way to such a state that I shall understand, destroyed is birth. This, Venerable Sir, is the path that I have obtained, which will lead me on to such a state that I shall understand, destroyed is birth, there is no more for the state of being. And the Buddha said, "Good, good, Udayi. Indeed, Udayi, this is the path that you have obtained, and when you have developed and cultivated it, it will lead you on while you are dwelling in the appropriate way to such a state that you will understand, destroyed is birth, the holy life has been lived, what had to be done has been done. There is no more for this state of being. So this sutta, this Rabbi Udai said that when he was a householder, he did not have much concern for the Dhamma or the Sangha. But when he reflected on the Buddha's teachings and on the Buddha and all that, then he went forth. And after he went forth, the Buddha taught him about his five aggregates of attachment. Then when he was staying in an empty kuti, he was contemplating the rise and fall of the five aggregates of attachment, the body, feeling, perception, volition, and consciousness, how impermanent they are. Then he understood the Four Noble Truths, and then he obtained the first path. Looks like what he means is that he has attained the stream entry. And then he says that if he continues practicing the 7 Bojjhanga, it will lead him to complete liberation. The next sutta is 46.31. Monks, whatever states there are that are wholesome, partaking of the wholesome, pertaining to the wholesome, they are all rooted in diligence, appamada, converge upon diligence, and diligence is declared to be the chief among them. When a monk is diligent, it is to be expected that he will develop and cultivate the 7 Bojangas, factors of enlightenment. And how, monks, does a monk who is diligent develop and cultivate the 7 factors of enlightenment? Here, monks, a monk develops the enlightenment factor of recollection, enlightenment factor of investigation of Dhamma, etc., which are based upon seclusion, dispassion and cessation, maturing in release. It is in this way, monks, that a monk who is diligent develops and cultivates the 7 factors of enlightenment. So here the Buddha says that of all the wholesome states, diligence, energetic effort is the most important. If we want anything, we need to put in a lot of effort to get what we want. And we must also have the Dhamma to guide us so that we put our effort in the right direction. If you put your effort in the wrong direction, you'll be wasting your time. So it's very important to understand the path very clearly and then to be diligent. The second sutta, the next sutta, 46.32. Monks, whatever states there are that are wholesome, partaking of the wholesome, pertaining to the wholesome, they are all rooted in careful attention, yoniso manasikara, converge upon careful attention, and careful attention is declared to be the chief among them. When a monk is accomplished in careful attention, it is to be expected that he will develop and cultivate the 7 factors of enlightenment. And how, monks, does a monk who is accomplished in careful attention develop and cultivate the 7 factors of enlightenment? As before, he cultivates the factor of recollection, followed by the factor of investigation of Dhamma, followed by energy, etc. Here, the Buddha says that careful attention is extremely important. It's just like the diligence. Now, what is this careful attention? The Pali word is yoniso manasikara. Yoniso comes from the word yoni, which means the womb or the birthplace. Mana is the mind. Kara is work. So it is work of mind that leads you to the birthplace or origin of the problem. So when you think of a problem, you are able to consider up to the cause, the origin of the problem. In other words, it is a good translation is thorough consideration. Thorough consideration. So you consider carefully and you can see very clearly. So if a person, his mind is very clear, then he can consider very thoroughly and he can see the situation very well. Which reminds me like the King Solomon supposed to be very wise. So one day, 2 ladies were fighting over one baby. So one claimed that this baby belongs to her, the other claimed that the baby belongs to her. So they brought these two ladies and the baby to the king. So the king looked at the problem and then he thought about the problem. So he must have this yoniso manasikara. He could see problem very clearly. So he said to two quarrelsome ladies, making big fuss. Okay, you want the baby, ask the soldier to cut the baby in half, you take half, you take half. So the real mother, when she heard this, she cried. She said, no, don't do that. If she wants a baby, let her have her. So it's very clear, King Solomon, this lady that cried is the mother. So he gave the baby to her. So you see, to be able to see clearly the problem and how to solve the problem is this yoniso manasikara. So here, this translation, careful attention, is also, although it's not exact, the translation, but it conveys the meaning that when you pay attention, you have to be very careful, consider thoroughly. So this is another factor that's very important. So I'll stop here for tonight. So you see how important it is to go through the suttas carefully, so that we understand exactly the Buddha's teaching. Because generally when you hear from other teachers, they talk about 7 Bojjhanga, and then they don't tell you how to practice the 7 Bojjhanga in the correct way. But here the Buddha tells you exactly, these 7 Bojangas must be practiced one by one, just like the Noble Eightfold Path. You must start with right view, and then after that it will lead you to right thoughts, and that will lead you to right speech, and that will lead you to right action. Yeah, anything?
Another person decides the 7 Bojjhanga and they get cured, then what caused the sickness to go away?
You see, nowadays actually doctors say a lot of our sickness, a lot of it, maybe 90%, is from the mind. Of course for the Arahants, it's not from the mind, but even though it's a physical sickness, but because of their love for the Dhamma, they have so much respect and love for the Dhamma that when they hear these 7 factors of enlightenment, they are so happy, and this happiness pervades the body, and they feel better.
On the basic, they say that people when you listen to or cultivate the 7 factors of enlightenment, then this comes to the destruction of karma. With the destruction of karma comes the destruction of suffering.
Yes, but this destruction of karma means, doesn't mean total destruction of karma. It means that you firstly, if you walk the spiritual path or the holy path, you don't want to create bad karma, right? And then you don't want to create good karma like charity and all that. You don't go out your way to do charity. Why? Because a person on the holy path, he goes inwards into his mind. When he develops the 7 factors of enlightenment, he's attained the 4 jhanas. When he's attained the 4 jhanas, he keeps going into his mind. He doesn't go out into the world. So in that way, he does not do any more karma. So in that sense, it's called destruction of karma. It's not that it's impossible for him to do any karma. He can do karma. Unless when the ego is eliminated, when the person attains arahanthood, then there is no self, there is no force behind that karma. So that when he does anything, when the Buddha, for example, when the Buddha says the Buddha decides to turn the Dhamma wheel, set in motion the Dhamma wheel to teach the Dhamma to the world. Actually, For an ordinary person, when you have this intention, is karma. But for the Buddha, for the enlightened person, there is no karma because there is no being behind the intention. So there is no karma. So in the case of a person who has not yet become enlightened, he still can create karma. It's only that he has no more interest to create karma.
And sometimes our friends are found to call them our friends and friends who is wrongly used and
Call them what?
It's not correct. Based on the explanation, it's not.
Yeah, not exactly correct. They are more like what we call soulmate. Nowadays there is a term soulmate. The mind refers to our mind, the state of the mind. So like you can say thoughts also, whatever is in the mind. To keep an eye on the mind, what is coming out in the mind. Just like feelings, when we refer to feelings, that means you just be aware when certain feelings arise. So when certain feelings arise, for example, like happy feelings, the Buddha says we should not allow these happy and unhappy feelings to shake our mind. So when happy feelings come up, naturally you want to be happy. So for an ordinary person, when you're happy, you want to jump for joy and you want to make a big thing out of it. You want to prolong it. But when it goes away, then you have a lot of dukkha. So because of that, the Buddha says, when happiness arises, just know it's happy. Don't be overjoyed. Just know that there is something temporary. It arises, it will pass away. So if you are able to control your happy feeling, so when suffering arises, in the same way, your mind is not easily moved. You can also just know that it's impermanent. But you need to develop a strong mind. If your mind is not strong, you may have the theory, but you cannot put it into effect because it will, that strong states of feeling will just knock you down. Why we need to observe the mind? Because sometimes unwholesome states arise, unwholesome states of mind arise, thoughts and all that. One of the factors of the Noble Eightfold Path is right effort. Right effort is when unwholesome states arise, you quickly try to get rid of it. And if wholesome states arise, then we try to prolong it. So observing the mind, observing the feelings are useful. A lot of us, we don't observe our mind. So when we don't observe our mind tricks us, For example, this Bojjhanga meditation, they taught to these prisoners, and this was prisoners who had killed people, murdered people and all that. Because the mind is very cunning, these people had actually killed somebody, but the mind tricked them into believing that they did not kill, They refused to believe that they killed somebody. Maybe they thought it's only in self-defense and all that. Then when they learn this vipassana meditation, they start to observe their mind. Then they realize they actually killed that person. Then only they admitted. So in the same way, all of us, we have a lot of faults. But a lot of people never want to look inside. So a lot of people always look at other people's fault. Never look at your own fault. So in that way, you can never change. And then when somebody criticizes you, tells you your fault, such people will refuse to believe. They get angry. They refuse to accept that they have these faults. But when we start looking into ourselves, instead of looking at other people's faults, we look into our own faults. then slowly you realize it's true we have such faults, and then we start changing. If you don't change, you are wasting your human life. The Buddha says you might as well go and die. Kisi kaho, because you are using up all your blessings. Every day you are using up your blessings. If you walk the spiritual path, then you are a living person. Otherwise, if you don't use your life in a good way, in a way that benefits you spiritually, you are as good as a dead man. The Buddha says, even if you live for 100 more years, you're not going to progress from now. So you might as well pass away. Even Jesus also said, Jesus, when he asked his new disciple to follow him, he said, because some of his disciples were fishermen, he said, come, I will make you fishers of men. Instead of catch fish, go and catch men. So one of them said, Lord, my father or something just died now. I said, I have to go back and bury him. Then what did Jesus say? Jesus said, let the dead bury the dead. In other words, those people who are not interested in the spiritual path, they are dead people. Let them take care of these dead affairs. Even the Buddha, when the Buddha was about to pass away, the Buddha said, after he has passed away, he told his disciples, you don't worry about my funeral and cremation and all that. Let the lay people look after that. So the Buddha is only interested in the spiritual path. All these worldly matters are not important. Okay, shall I transfer that?